been searching for you here for so long, so long. I've been searching for you here for so long, so long.
What is happening, folks? Welcome to another episode, Unfiltered Bachelor. I'm your Unfiltered Bachelor, moneyblakeweather. We are still doing the We All Want Love series. We're just doing a subcategory of that. I'm here with my buddy, Valerie Cavazos, again. I don't really call you that full name, so I'm like always like, did I say it right? And like I've known you for like 3 years.
Yeah.
And so she does this thing called the Burnout Project. And I just want to say, how does this tie into Unfiltered Bachelor? You can be friends with people you date, folks. It's not a big thing. Like you could definitely do it. That is us. We literally met on Hinge. Yeah. 3 years ago, we matched. Went to Valoria.
R.I.P.
Rest
It was
in
a good
peace
place.
to Valoria. Yeah. And then we had a second date at Batch.
Oh, yeah.
But I went to A-Trek, rest in peace,
R.I.P.
which is now Love
A-Track.
Supreme.
We can't, like any place we have, it just gets shut down.
They just get shut down.
Yeah.
And then we stayed friends during the pandemic. It's a real thing. You can just click with people and like they begin to be like just, your life buddies. So
Absolutely.
here we are. And you're doing all the things with the Burnout Project.
I am. Yeah. No, Blake and I, we met 3 years ago, just kind of like on a whim on an app. And then, really, have became really good friends through all that time. With the Burnout Project, that's something that I've just put a lot of passion into these last few years, 2020 being like really the revamp of that time. Or not revamp of that time, but 2020 being like when I kind of like reestablished the Burnout Project and really created a better foundation. It started in 2016, ended up on the back burner at that point, but this year especially has been when I've like really started to like put the values into action. It's been
It seems
great.
like the last year, like you've done you tried to promote stuff to South by Southwest last
Absolutely,
year.
Yeah.
And then any little event in between, like
Right.
you've sort of like just been like, okay, let's go do this thing.
Right.
So I've been to one of your events. They're fun.
Do you like it?
They're fun.
Oh, it was so fun. That was a good one.
That was
Honestly the biggest one. That was October 2021.
October 5th, because it was the day before I was going to move in. Or October 6th.
6th, yeah.
Because it was the day that I started moving in.
Right.
And yeah, it was so fancy.
It was very fancy.
I'm so glad I dressed up the way I did.
It was dapper. Everyone was dressed up. Everyone was having a good time. And it really was like the Kickstarter or like the soft kickstart of like what the Burnout Project is going to bring.
Okay.
And so backstory, the Burnout Project, it's a mental health advocacy center for healthcare providers and educators. It is a resource center for all things positive mental health advocacy. And it's not only to talk about the negative stuff, it's also just to have that community and people who value the same things, and wanting to just like really change the culture of the workplace. Healthcare is a very unique setting where there's been this like historic culture of just you have to be tough, you have to go through.
You gotta go through the struggle.
Right.
Yeah.
And I have found that it's okay to shift that culture a little bit. So I did an event in October with Central Texas PA Society during PA week. So physician assistants, physician associates, we are often like go hand in hand with a lot of, what doctors, we work side by side with doctors. And I found that we are kind of like the team that really can change and pivot the culture in medicine. So.
And this is all about people. This is mental health. That's what it is, right?
It is, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh. What is what is one of the more forgotten? I'm a big advocate, obviously, of mental health,
Right.
especially when it comes to just relationships, not just like romantic relationships, but interpersonal relationships, right?
Absolutely.
Friendships, family, but like most importantly, I think the romantic relationships, which is where you figure out a lot of like the do's and don'ts, and then some of them don't get corrected because of your mental health, and I imagine it's that way in this world
similar.
as well.
Yeah, super similar. So I found that when you look at relationships in the workplace, there is a lot of correlation with how things are expressed and how things are taken. And so I've been kind of like studying and working on ways on how to build those relationships that happen in the workplace and finding the space to respect that and understand that we are not just like robots in the system. We are individuals, people with our own feelings, with our own thoughts, with our own background and baggage and everything that kind of can correlate and correspond with what we do on a day-to-day basis. And finding a way to like link those two, humanize medicine, where it's okay to kind of like process the feelings and process the emotions, do it quickly because sometimes like you have to do it on the spot, but also, respect it for what it is. And relationships really being the key point of like understanding people on an individual level or the system on an individual level.
I'm trying to think of how to like frame this because ultimately, right, like the way that you handle your mental health in one area bleeds into the other area. The way that you handle stressors, the way that you get triggered, the way that you react, it bleeds in from one area into the other.
Right.
And do you find that, like, as you're teaching this to people, do you think that they actually get it?
I think that we've as healthcare, and again, I'll speak like on different, like as a healthcare provider, we get it. Like we know that, we've always been taught you got to separate it. There's work-life balance. You got to just differentiate the two. You keep work at home. You keep life at home.
That's such an ethereal thing.
It is.
It's more so like when somebody goes through a breakup and you're like, but just get over it. It's like,
right.
Okay, like if I could do that, I'd do that.
Sure.
So what makes like this other approach different, or what is practical advice that you try to help out with in that?
I think like one of the biggest things that I help like teaching providers, or if I'm, teaching like a group of people, is that you need to be able to kind of really identify what you're feeling and like being able to be aware of like what kind of like other underlying aspects are at play.
Right.
And it could be like personal stuff, or like personal things are at play when you're going, when you're reacting a certain way or feeling a certain way. And it's really breaking that down and allowing it to be okay, where we can communicate. I teach people on how to communicate certain things without using all the words. Healthcare providers don't like using words and talking about feelings and all this stuff. Like
people don't like using words
to
describe feelings.
Yeah, exactly. So instead of like compartmentalizing everything and, saving it for later, how can you unpack it really quick and then express it more correctly, organized, and efficiently?
Have you ever heard of this? I mean, this reminds me of a video I did a while ago on like social media about the feelings wheel. Are you familiar with this?
I've heard you've mentioned the feeling wheel to me. I don't know much.
So I'm gonna look this up real quick. A
Okay.
feelings wheel is essentially it's this wheel, and it's utilized in like psychology and stuff. And it is a big wheel of feelings, essentially, like a feeling words.
Okay.
Feelings wheel. Like here's an image.
I probably like avoided it at all costs.
Oh, facts. But here's what it looks like.
Okay. Yes, I've seen that before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it starts off like in the center you have it goes out and it gets wider. The wider that the circle gets, the more descriptive words for the feelings you get.
Right.
So in the center you have mad, sad, peaceful, powerful, joyful, scared.
Right.
And then outside of that, like in mad, you got critical, hateful, selfish, angry, hostile, hurt, and sad. You have guilty, ashamed, depressed, lonely, bored, tired. Like peaceful, content, thoughtful, intimate, loving. Like you've got these descriptor words to not only describe like, hey, I feel mad. Well, it's like, well, what kind of mad do you feel? Do you feel like resentment mad? Do you feel mad because you stubbed your toe? Do you feel mad because like you didn't get a project done at work? Like what kind of mad is it This
Right.
elongated mad? Is it the mad from your past? Or is it that just like, hey, this thing happened and like it makes me mad? And you can be like, yeah, I think that would make anybody mad.
Yeah. I like, I've seen the color, like now that I look at it, like visualized it, I've looked and seen the color wheel, and there's like different theories behind it. One of the ones that like I like to I guess if I were to look at the color wheel, these like really
Feelings wheel.
yeah, the feelings, what did I say?
Color wheel.
Color wheel.
color
It is a
wheel.
color wheel. With the feelings wheel, there's like, okay, fear and anger. I think there's a lot of times just a very close connection between fear and anger. And a lot of times people will express anger because there is maybe
They're
a
afraid.
fearful component.
Yeah.
And for someone to be able to say like, hey, I am fearful, it's actually really hard. That is like one of like the more complex emotions, because that bleeds into worry, that can show
Anxiety,
some
depression,
right?
a lot of different
And
things.
it's a very vulnerable thing to say like, well, I'm scared, when
Right.
that usually is a very common reaction that people have.
Anger is never, anger is never the actual emotion that you're feeling. Anger is the bully.
Right.
He is the security guard for
Yeah.
whatever feeling that you're, whether it's hurt,
Yeah.
afraid, sad, whatever. Like it
Right.
is the bodyguard that steps in and is like, hey, I got this little homie.
Right.
So it's, I don't know, it's the thing where you just kind of have to keep the security in check.
Yeah. I feel a lot of times people will express anger or just express fear, and the first thing you see is anger, and you're like, oh man, you just, it's not a pleasing thing to be a part of or see or understand. But one of the things I like to advocate for is you have to feel it to heal it. Like you have to be able to name it to tame it mentality.
There's a book I have called "What You Feel You Can Heal," and it's very true. But you have to identify but what is the feeling?
Right.
And this is why I ask, like, medical healthcare professionals, such the most analytical and logical people, very intelligent people, but like you can understand the concepts. That doesn't mean that you know how to apply it. Right.
Right.
Like I come from the world of kickboxing and boxing and stuff. I can understand the principles of throwing a left hook, but if I
Right.
don't actually turn my body and torque it, I'm never going to get it right.
Right.
And so that's the same thing. Like, yes, me saying like, do they understand this? Well, they understand this. Are they getting it? Are they knowing to, again, if I could bring it back to the hook, are they knowing to torque turn the foot when they, turn the hips, throw
Right.
everything into it? Are they knowing that practicality behind just the idea?
It's hard. No, I think it's just not super common practice for anyone. Like even within healthcare, outside of healthcare,
Right.
It's so hard to be able to like understand. This reaction is derived from this feeling because this underlying issue. That's, I think, just human nature. We are reactive people. We're a reactive species. Like we react to whatever is in our environment. So
Facts.
it's hard. It's something that does take training. It's something that does need to be like learned. It's not normal to just be like, oh, let me just break this down really quick. It is so difficult. I mean, I'm not good at it either.
Right.
It takes effort, and that's the hard part.
Yeah, it does take effort. It does take a certain awareness. It does take reflection. People don't feel like they have time for it, though.
Right.
And then it bleeds
Exactly.
into work, and it bleeds into part of the reason why I'm imagining you started this whole project.
Yeah, and I think it does really, like, if you're just bottling up all of these emotions that you can't really name or you can't really express, you end up just bottling until it's just this expressed emotion that is usually volatile, or it doesn't, it has poor timing. It's not, congruent with with other people's emotions. It's not empathetic or compassionate. The timing of it's usually bad whenever people react
Right.
to these emotions that they just don't understand. Yeah.
So I guess let's start from the beginning here. That we've got sort of here's the premise of the movie. Like,
I know.
what are you do a lot of things. You teach a lot on this. Where do you begin teaching with this?
That's the hard part. A lot of times it kind of depends on who the audience is. So if it's an individual that I'm working with,
So you do one-on-ones? You
I
don't
do
just
one-on-ones,
okay.
not too many anymore. On occasion, I'll do one-on-ones.
Okay.
But even like if I'm, if it's like a group of people, like I like to understand what's the underlying issue.
Yeah.
Within healthcare, there's so many aspects. Like sometimes it's communication. People aren't communicating with each other and they're just not able to function as a team. Or perhaps there's just so much bottling that's occurring that there's a lot of volatile reactions that are occurring within a system. And it's like, hey, the team's not expressing what's going on.
Right.
So I like to kind of figure out what's the common theme, where's the problem. Everyone is very different. Every system is very different. There's common themes of like why, some of the same tools can apply to everyone. But I like to just like really specify and figure out like what's going on, what specifically is happening. And you get a story. If you understand someone's story, that really just helps you understand and be aware of the situation. So
Facts.
Yeah.
Facts. So I think that's fascinating. As far as like making, at least in the healthcare world, that's a tongue twister. Healthcare world. It being practical advice to help elongate, I think, your career, your mental health, and hopefully extract like real world practicality and advice to lead into the rest of your life. Is the goal eventually to expand this beyond just like healthcare, like for sort of an everybody thing? Because I think this is super beneficial.
Yeah. I think like because I'm a healthcare provider and I work in education or like academia, I find there to be like a strong correlation. But I think it is essential for people outside of healthcare to understand and be compassionate of some of the like the issues and the stressors that healthcare providers and educators go through. So it's like kind of like it's opening kind of the awareness of what healthcare providers go through. Someone who's not in healthcare should know, and it's beneficial to know like, hey, these are people too with feelings. And I think it goes beyond just healthcare. It goes beyond just educators. It's really creating this like community of people that respect, the fields and understand the correlations that are there as well.
Right.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
What is the ultimate goal then of this?
I think it's just creating the dialogue, like the open dialogue of like, it's okay to have these conversations. My ultimate goal is to really change the culture in medicine. For years and years and years, I mean, historically, you don't talk emotions. ER, trauma, there's this wall that you just have to.
You would think that like they're gonna be like, well, I guess I gotta go to the psych ward after this. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I just saw somebody's arm get like mangled, or like I just had to do open heart and like dude died. Like, what the fuck?
For perspective, like you go into different as a provider. There's room 1 through 12. And we'll talk like ER trauma perspective or surgical, any of those will apply. We'll say ER because a lot of people are like, you watch the TV shows and you see ER.
I've seen Grey's Anatomy.
You've seen Grey's Anatomy. You have rooms 1 through 12. Room 1, you have someone with the flu. Room 2, you have someone who's going through, they have a diabetic,
episode
something, right? Yeah. Their blood sugar's too high. Room 3, you can have someone having a heart attack. Room 4, someone may have died. And every single room that you open, it's a new experience. It's a new feeling that you're having to like control and like process. And it's really hard to say like, okay, I'm going to experience room 1 and move on to room 4 and just like crumple it up and compartmentalize and just move on. Yes, you have to do that. To a certain extent, you have to just be able to like treat all your patients, with a new kind of like new sheet. Like it's just, you're starting over. But I find it important to understand, like, we have to process and unpack. Like, sure, you can put it on the shelf for later, but you have to go back and unpack whatever you put in that shelf or, like, whatever you're, pushing in the closet or stuffing in the closet. Mm-hmm. Because if you don't, you're bottling and bottling and bottling, and it just weighs on providers. It weighs on people. And I just want to change the culture of that, where it's okay in the middle of your workday to be like, okay, I need to step aside and really process what I'm going through, or communicate that with your colleagues and be able to, express it where you have your team, your community to be there for you.
Right.
Yeah.
I think it's important, especially in the medical profession. I think in any profession for sure, like military or something where
Absolutely.
it's like, hey, cops, something where it's like, hey, I'm on the go, and it could be anything.
Right.
And I'm just gonna clock out and pretend that never happened.
Right.
When I'm human and I experience these things, and I have no idea how to cope with what I'm experiencing.
Right. Yeah.
So it's all about like essentially like reactionary coping in a sense, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a way to, right now with healthcare, it's been such a exhausting field for people because, we've gone through the pandemic. We all experienced the pandemic in our own way, but healthcare providers had to really go through something quite traumatic in our
History.
It is something that certain individuals will never quite understand what it was like to be in a hospital in the middle of a pandemic with the unknown and the uncertainty and the fear. And a lot of that was expressed in anger. Isolation caused certain, just reactions as well. So I find it like super important now to really be able to find, the ability and like vulnerability to be okay. Like we can express it, we can talk about it.
Right.
It wasn't doable at the time for a lot of people. You just were, you just had to just move through it. You didn't even have the time to express fear or label fear. And so I think it is an important thing to just, unpack and unravel.
I was going to say, I think there's a difference between being fearless and brave and then just being completely detached and avoidant of your feelings.
Right.
Because even fearless and brave is a feeling.
Absolutely.
But if you're just like, all right, memory wipe, like,
Yeah.
remember the little erasey things that you do? You turn the knob,
you shake it,
and then you're just like, all right, back to the drawing board.
Yeah.
Here we go. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like, there's a difference between
Yes.
that. I think as I was thinking, I'm like, yeah, it could be fearless and sort of brave, and in a sense it is, but like I think it often gets all balled up and rolled into they're just detached.
Absolutely.
From like they're not only doing, they're probably detached in other areas of their life.
Right.
You know what I mean?
And it absolutely just all bleeds together. The separation of work-life balance. A lot of times it's not doable.
Do you feel like you've gone through this?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
What has it led to that's been sort of, what's been one of the byproducts because of your burnout that you've gone through?
I'd say, and I am so passionate about healthcare and I love healthcare. So I can't say like I've burnt out from being in healthcare, but I've been burnt out over the circumstances within healthcare many times. One of the side effects that I have experienced, because I've worked in trauma, I've worked in surgery. I was in a level 1 trauma center in the middle of the pandemic. So I've been there. And one of the side effects of not knowing or practicing the tools that I now like very, very much uphold is resentment. You end up being resentful of of the situation you've been in, of the lack of understanding. There's resentment in your community. When there's a lack of something, and there's also an inability to express, so much resentment is built, and to a point where it's a lot of times you're not even realizing how much resentment is building and growing until you've just kind of reached your end and you're like, what just happened? Like I am later breaking down, like I am angry, fearful, and all the things because there wasn't an understanding at the time or an awareness level at the time.
Wow. And what specific though has happened? Has it been like sleepless nights? Is it insomnia? Has it been you're like, I'm drinking more than often. Why am I doing this? Like, what has been like the coping, byproduct that has happened because of that?
Well, I mean, that can be broken down into like so many things, but Because yes, a lot of people in healthcare will go to vices to
Right.
kind of like mask, and that's a very dangerous territory, especially in healthcare when you're surrounded by different medications, many different specialties that have that is its own just kind of like terror zone of,
Right.
vices. But I would say a lot of times it's just realizing the isolation especially is probably. Actually, go back. What was I missed what your question was.
I was saying like because of this, because of like the quote unquote, maybe it's burnout, it's light burnout or whatever, like what are specific ways like of that you found yourself because you were going through burnout of like being like I'm working out way too much. Like, why am I working out so much? Am I trying, like, what did you do to like assist you in processing like these feelings of like, I have a lot of resentment. I have some, maybe is this anger? Am I upset? Like not being like, not at the time, maybe knowing what the feeling was, but trying to let it out in other areas. And I think oftentimes I was bringing up the fact that it often comes out in unhealthy ways, right? Like it can come out in healthy ways. Like people can like, I'm just going to spend all my time at the gym because that makes me feel better and I have control over that. And that's what makes me feel good. For some people, it's drinking. For some people, it's like they carry that stress with them. They have insomnia. They can't sleep. They get stressed. They're more on edge. You know, people around them feel like they're walking a tight wire. Like,
so when I started noticing that I was maybe more like short-tempered, or if I was more being more isolated or felt isolated, especially during the pandemic, I kind of like created a system for myself of like, what are my areas of need? I kind of broke it down. Like if I would break it down for anyone else, it was like, well, what would I do for someone else who's feeling the way I'm feeling?
right.
Cause I did notice, especially like pandemic era, like I'm like, I am not myself anymore. Like there's parts of me that are not, I am not me. And, that's its own story in itself. So I broke it down, like hand to paper, and started to like, what are my essential needs right now? And one of the things I was like, well, I need to talk to someone. So therapy is important. Did that. I started trying to figure out, well, now I need to like name what I'm going through. I actually should put a label to this emotion. And that was something that was really important. And then the other part was like community. I wasn't the only one feeling this way. None of us were talking about how we were feeling. We're just going through the motions. And a lot of times it's just like, oh, a joke. Like, oh yeah, I just, we're in this shit show, or, we're like,
Using humor to sort of
downplay. Yeah. And it's like, here we are again, middle of a pandemic, no big deal, but it was a big deal. And so I started to kind of grow the community, and allow for this space of being able to talk about it, of asking like, hey, how are you? Like, really, like, what's going on? I've noticed you weren't here X amount of days. Like, what did you do? Why, even just asking like, what, you can figure like sometimes people just really did go on vacation. Other times they're at their breakdown phase. And just opening that dialogue where it was like, hey, I had to take a moment away too, because that was like a really hard experience.
Right.
Or, I started noticing even physical appearances of some of my colleagues, noticing that their hair was a little bit more messy, and they just weren't presenting themselves as who they were.
Or just be looking tired.
You look tired, yeah. And it's like when you start, losing track of just, or not allowing the time and space for this, like, how you present yourself as a provider, like there's other underlying issues. So I just kind of started being more aware of like my own actions, my colleagues' actions, and talking and having open dialogue about it. And then from that created a curriculum and became really activist in upholding those values in the curriculum.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So what all does this curriculum, like, maybe not all the pieces, but like from start to finish, what do you hope to accomplish, and what are sort of the things, like sort of in a nutshell, that you go over?
Like for me, community is everything. So I just want to create a community of people and be a space where people can come and really be vulnerable and it be okay to talk about these things, and also just advocate for it on a system-wide level where, you know, it's changing the culture. That's my whole initiative as a mental health advocate and someone who values wellness and someone who values, like, we don't have to do what's been done before. We can change. It's a shift in culture, and that's ultimately what I want to do.
How hard of a process is this?
I think it's pretty hard. Like, it's hard to establish, but it's not hard to maintain, because I think once you start realizing, like, oh, I don't have to be this way, and I don't have to show this, like, steel wall to, you know, my colleagues, and there's, you know, even just an area of just, you know, you let a little bit of light kind of shine through, and you can be, it's comfortable, then it's actually pretty easy, you know. It's just, you know, one person changes the situation or the circumstance, or, you know, for everyone. And if there's, like, it's a chain reaction, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Like, if one person sees it, they're going to be like, fantastic.
Yeah.
And so, again, back to the curriculum, though, you want to create a sense of community, but like, that's all you're trying to do when you teach this curriculum, is create community? Or are you trying to be like, hey, like, are there, within your curriculum, are there, like, practical examples that people are able to draw from? Is there
Absolutely.
like a knowledge-based thing? Like,
yeah, I focus on a lot of it being, like, scientific research showing how these tools that I provide have validity. So in healthcare specifically, like, we're very much like, well, show me the data, show me, you know, what's the study, what are the studies for this? So what I've done is I've learned through this curriculum different ways, like tools for people to put in their toolbox of what they can do on the fly, quickly, efficiently, and effectively to kind of shift that culture. And my hope is to be able to start from, you know, even like the executive corporate level, and change the system from the top down. Because if your company is valuing certain initiatives, then you will reflect those values and those initiatives to your employees, and therefore be able to really shift the culture. Now, if we're just, you know, educating a small pocket of people and it's not really being represented from, you know, the higher up administrative level, I don't see how it's going to be sustainable. It's a slower, you know, process too, a slower chain reaction or domino effect. So my aim is to really shift culture from, you know, from the administrative executive level, you know, top of the line of a system down to its employers.
Wow. Man,
Yeah.
that's big change.
I know. I mean, it's not easy either, but it's as a conversation is more normal. And if you normalize something like that, then it's a little bit easier. And I've worked with different hospital systems that do find a value in this. Like, you know, Dell Children has been really amazing, and I've kind of learned a lot from their team.
Nice.
And you know, I've been taught by them, and we've gone through trainings together, and I see how where it starts, it creates a huge change, a huge difference. And so I'm a big advocate for what they do. And that's kind of the, you know, they've been very supportive of the Burnout Project. And I love that. We each value each other's initiatives, and we have very similar, you know, values as well. And so we work together, and we've seen positive, huge
gel.
change.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's been amazing. Yeah.
That's fantastic. Would you be up for, I know you've got a skedaddle soon. Would you be up for doing a part 2?
Yeah.
And sort of going over, I feel like if this piques people's interest, going over some of the practicality aspects or the some of the tips that you teach, not giving away we don't need to give away all the mac and cheese, but you know, a couple, you know,
absolutely,
couple pieces would be helpful, I think.
Yeah,
for people.
I think so. And I think with the, like, maybe an idea we can bring up sometime is, like, how do you deal with someone, that a loved one or a friend or family member that's in healthcare, and knowing how to, like, have that conversation, you know, that could probably apply to a lot of people, and it's not so specific to healthcare.
I think it would be very helpful
right?
for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I think families of healthcare providers and families of educators, they suffer a lot too because they don't know how to react or respond, and they don't really know from a fundamental level like what's going on.
Right.
So
it's creating a level of understanding.
Yeah.
Yeah. I changed the slogan for this podcast to relating through relationships. And I don't mean it in the sense of, I focus a lot on romantic side relationships and interpersonal relationships in that aspect, but it's a broader
right.
Scope of interpersonal relationships, of family and friends,
Right.
relating through relationships. Like
Right.
that's something I think we can all stand to do, and I think that's a large part at the end of the day of like what you're trying to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that would be great because I mean, a lot of this really does, all emotions are portrayed differently for everyone, and they do affect relationships. Like my loved ones suffered to a certain extent or like in certain ways because I wasn't able to communicate what I was going through during the pandemic. And even I'm still in healthcare, and my dating life is affected because of what I'm going through in healthcare. And there's that, like, there's a disconnect of understanding. And I think on a bigger level, larger scale, understanding relationships as a whole and dynamics and like understanding just, perspective is huge. And so I think it would be super beneficial. It all kind of flows and
it does flow. I mean, I'm writing a book currently, We All Want Love, but the original title of it was Trauma is Trauma. Mm-hmm. And it sort of sounds weird, but like it's going to be a chapter of the book, but like trauma is trauma. We all go through trauma. We all go through dramatic things. Mm-hmm. And really what we're all trying to understand is why we react the way that we do. And it really, I think part of it is understanding the trauma that we went through.
Right.
And then being like, this is why we chose to do this. Here's how we can correct those unhealthy behaviors.
Yeah.
What do you got there?
Absolutely. Well, I was going to share a quote. Like I remember this one quote that really, is impactful is like understanding. Here, I'll just read it to you. But yeah. James Baldwin said, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced." Ooh. So I know it's a good one, right? So
somebody write that on Facebook.
No, put it somewhere. We're gonna have to
put that on a shirt.
Yeah, put it on a shirt, put it on a sticker and whatever, billboard it. But it's true. It's like you can't change some things. You just can't change. We'll never change the pandemic. It happened. It is a trauma that will forever be something we all experienced. But you can change perspective. You can't change, reaction and all that. But you got to face it, and that's something that really gets unpacked when I have sessions with, providers and traumas have their triggers and you have to understand it to be able to like, really
it's getting to the
it.
Source though. Like with any good understanding of mental health and emotional health, it's not about the thing that set you off recently. It's about getting to the core of the thing. I had a therapist on one time and she was like, it's like walking through a landmine field and you set one off, but that one is not the one, like it's not the impact of that one landmine. It's the fact that it's attached to 10 other ones that go back all this way. And what she's like, what we try to do with therapy is get to the source. So that way you can sort of diffuse these other diffusing one at the very beginning may diffuse 10, 100 of the landmines in your life. Yeah. So that way you're not triggered the same way.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think it's a great conversation and great awareness for people. And I'd love to have you back on so we could do a part two.
Let's do it.
Let's do it sooner rather than part two, sooner rather than later.
Done. Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Val, for coming on.
Thank you.
Take over my show real quick. Where can people find you? Where can people find the Burnout Project? They want to learn more about this.
All right. So you can find more about the Burnout Project at Valerie Dezarae on Instagram. So at Valerie Dezarae, Dezarae spelled Dezarae, or at the Burnout Project ATX.
So fancy.
I know, so fancy. And then through the Instagram, there'll be a link to a website with more information.
Fantastic. Everybody go follow Burnout Project, Facebook, Instagram. Yeah. Is it anywhere else? It's just those social mediums for right now?
For now, that's the main one.
Okay, perfect. Everybody go follow it online. While you're online, you can follow me, Money Blakeweather, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat, TikTok if you want to see clips the podcast. I go ahead and I post stuff on there. Or you can follow the podcast, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or on your favorite podcast app, anywhere podcasts are. That's where the show is. Spotify, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts. Like I said, anywhere. Just ask Alexa or ask Siri. Bring on Unfiltered Bachelor, and she'll pull it on up. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Val, thank you so much again for taking some time to come on.
Absolutely.
And everybody, thank y'all for tuning in right now, morning, evening, afternoon. I always appreciate you. Hope you're having a great 2023. And until the next time, we will see you.
Till next time.
Peace.
The bright city lights, they drew me in so close, and they held me